The day after my husband was buried, his children walked into my home and told me they wanted the estate, the business, the properties, and every account he had ever owned. My lawyer expected me to fight. Everyone expected me to fight. Instead, I calmly said something that made the entire room fall silent. Give it all to them. For months, people whispered that grief had destroyed my judgment. Even my own attorney begged me to reconsider. But what nobody knew was that my husband had prepared for this exact moment years before he died. And at the final hearing, when I signed every document without hesitation, his children smiled with victory. Their smiles disappeared seconds later. Interested story with strong base. My name is Eleanor, and for 23 years I was married to a man named Richard. He was not only my husband but also my best friend and business partner. Together, we built a successful logistics company from a tiny warehouse into a regional operation worth millions. Richard had 2 children from his first marriage, Daniel and Sarah. I tried for years to have a close relationship with them, but they never truly accepted me. To them, I was always the outsider who somehow became part of their father's life after their parents divorced. As the company grew, Richard became increasingly concerned about the way his children viewed money. He loved them deeply, but he worried they saw wealth as something to inherit rather than something to earn. Many times I watched him offer them opportunities within the business, only to see them quit when the work became difficult. Richard never spoke harshly about them, but I could tell he feared what would happen when he was no longer around to guide them. One evening after a family argument, he quietly told me that true character only reveals itself when people believe nobody is watching. When Richard suddenly passed away after a heart condition, the loss shattered me. The funeral had barely ended when Daniel and Sarah arrived with their attorneys. Their sympathy lasted less than 5 minutes before the conversation shifted toward assets. They wanted control of the company immediately. They wanted every property transferred. They wanted access to investment accounts and corporate authority. My lawyer looked stunned by their aggressiveness, but I simply listened. Every demand they made sounded almost rehearsed, as if they had planned this conversation long before Richard died. The weeks that followed became increasingly uncomfortable. Friends of the family called me privately and urged me to defend my rights. Employees feared the future of the company. My attorney spent hours preparing legal strategies and showing me how easily we could challenge the claims. Yet every time someone asked what I intended to do, I gave the same answer. Let them have it. The reaction was always the same: confusion, concern, sometimes even anger. People thought I was surrendering out of grief. In reality, I was following instructions Richard had personally given me years earlier. Several years before his death, Richard had created a confidential agreement with a respected legal team. He never explained every detail, but he told me one thing clearly. If his children ever attempted to seize everything without earning it, I was not to interfere. I was to allow events to unfold exactly as written. At the time, I thought the conversation was strange. After his death, however, the meaning became painfully clear. Richard had anticipated their actions and quietly designed a test that no one else knew existed. As months passed, Daniel and Sarah became increasingly confident. They told friends they had won. They talked openly about future profits and expansion plans. Some employees were dismissed because they questioned management decisions. Long-standing relationships with clients began to weaken. Despite all of this, I remained silent. My attorney was frustrated, but I asked him to trust me. Deep down, I knew the real battle had not yet begun. It was simply waiting for the right moment. The final hearing arrived on a rainy morning. The courtroom was filled with attorneys, financial advisors, family friends, and company representatives. Daniel and Sarah appeared relaxed and cheerful. Their legal team presented stacks of paperwork transferring ownership and authority. When my turn came, I calmly reviewed each document and signed without hesitation. The siblings exchanged satisfied looks. To them, victory was complete. They believed they had finally secured everything Richard had spent a lifetime building. Then, the opposing attorney requested that one final sealed document be opened and entered into the record. The room became unusually quiet. As the document was read aloud, the expression on Daniel's face changed first. Then Sarah's. Finally, even their attorney looked shocked. Years earlier, Richard had transferred the true ownership of the company into a protected structure that could only remain active if certain conditions were met. One condition required future owners to demonstrate active leadership, ethical conduct, and measurable business performance over a probationary period. Failure automatically triggered a different provision. The provision was devastating, because Daniel and Sarah had already violated multiple requirements through documented actions taken after Richard's death. Ownership rights were immediately revoked. The company, its intellectual property, and the majority of its assets transferred into an employee trust overseen by an independent board. The board had the authority to retain experienced leadership and preserve the company exactly as Richard intended. Daniel and Sarah were left with only a modest inheritance fund that Richard had originally set aside for them. Everything they thought they had won vanished in a matter of minutes. The courtroom remained silent as the realization settled over everyone present. For months they had believed I was weak. For months they assumed I had surrendered. The truth was that Richard had never wanted revenge. He wanted accountability. He wanted the company protected from people who valued ownership more than responsibility. His final lesson was not about money, it was about character. And on the day they believed they had won everything, his children discovered that entitlement can never replace integrity. As I left the courthouse, my lawyer finally understood why I never fought back. Richard had already fought the most important battle years earlier. He knew that wealth could be inherited, but wisdom could not. Behind me, the people who had chased everything stood speechless. Ahead of me stood a future built on the values Richard spent his life defending. In the end, they received exactly what they earned, and Richard's final lesson became the one they would never forget.